And as many of you already know, this is a much debated topic. Quality assurance is crucial for responsible and safe perpetrator work. However, we currently even lack a common definition of what success means when working with men who use violence. Moreover, the different methods, tools, and procedures that are used to measure the outcome are very varied from one country to another in Europe, and they usually lack of standardization and also harmonization. So all of this poses a real challenge to adequately measure the impact of perpetrator program and also to develop firm conclusions about what works. As you know, it's very difficult, even still now, to say what really works with perpetrator programs. And that also in turn makes it very difficult to derive policy recommendations. So today we will discuss about those challenges, and we will try to offer some ideas, some examples, some recommendations on how to tackle them. We are very enthusiastic to have this discussion around such a complex issue and to count on with the experience of the experts that will accompany us today. So as for the agenda, first I will briefly introduce the experts of this roundtable. Then we will have a presentation about the challenges and lessons learned from perpetrator program evaluations. Thereafter, the NGOs that are participating today as experts will introduce the context in which they work. And then we will have an open discussion about the experience that they had with outcome evaluations. Finally, we will ask you to please answer an anonymous questionnaire to give feedback about the roundtable, which is basically for our internal evaluation, internal quality evaluation. So I will now introduce the experts that will be sharing their knowledge and experience today with us. So we have Marianne Hester, who is Professor of Gender, Violence and International Policy at the University of Bristol. She has many years of experience researching violence against women and children, including key research on men who use violence. Marianne is currently involved in research on men, domestic violence and the health service, victim perspectives on justice, and high-risk domestic violence perpetrator programs. Her expertise was crucial for the development of an outcome evaluation tool called the Impact Outcome Evaluation Toolkit that we will be briefly talking about today also. Thank you, Marianne. Then we also have Elena Cagiotto. She's a project manager for Una Casa per l'Uomo, which is an Italian organization that manages a program for men who use violence called Cambiamento Maschile, a support service for victims called Stella Antares, and 2 shelters for victims, Casa Aurora and Casa Alma. Recently, the work of Una Casa per l'Uomo has focused on collaboration protocols between service for perpetrators and service for victims. Therefore, with her unique viewpoint that unites perpetrator work and victim support services, Elena can share insights into these collaborative program evaluation procedures. Thank you, Elena, also. Then we have Thomas Reppa. I hope I said it correctly. He is psychologist and psychotherapist and head of work of men who use violence in the League of Open Men, LOM, based in the Czech Republic. LOM is an NGO focused on improving the quality of men, and their focus is greater involvement of fathers in the upbringing of children and work with violence. Another key area for LOM is the support of young adults living institutional care with adult mentors. LOM has structured the outcome evaluation procedure since the very beginning of the development of the program for men who use violence. And also they have been collaborating with a research institute in order to ensure reliability and quality of their outcome measurement. So we think that their experience will also be very valuable in this roundtable. And last but not least, we have also Marina Golovsky, who is the program director at Men of the 21st Century, M21, which is based in Russia. She has been working on the implementation of the Impact Toolkit evaluation at M21, and her research interests include work, impact evaluation and gender-based violence prevention. M21 has long experience on working online with men who use violence. So she will bring valuable insights for an area of work, which, as many of you already know, has gained a lot of importance during the pandemic. So I want to thank you all for accepting our invitation and for your availability to share your expertise with us today. Now we will move to the second point in our agenda, in which Marianne Hester will discuss her expertise around the challenges and the lessons learned from Perpetrator program evaluations. I would recommend you that if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat, as Anna has just mentioned. We will have a short session of questions after Marianne's presentations, but we want to have kind of the big discussion and the open discussion when we have the open roundtable discussion. But in any case, so you can always post the questions in the chat also, and we will try to answer them after Marianne's presentation. So Marianne, please, when you're ready.
Thank you, Berta. I'll just share my screen. Can you all see that? Yeah? Yeah, good. Amazing to see all of you here. And of course, I can see there are lots of people here who are very experienced evaluators. You know, you've been doing research and evaluation yourselves, for some of you for many years. So that's quite terrifying in a sense. But what I'm going to talk about is not what we have found from any of the evaluations that I've been doing. So I mean, I've done quite a lot of different evaluations of perpetrator programs, both moderate programs and high harm programs and so on, quite different forms of programs. So I'm happy to talk about that afterwards. But instead, what I'm going to talk about is quite sort of technical. I'm going to look at what some of you know a lot about, but hopefully some of you might not know as much about, which is really what is evaluation and what is it we need to think about when we set up an evaluation. What is it that we are doing in terms of evaluation? And actually this tension that we also have between, on the one hand, the academics who want to do the evaluation and the practitioners who need evaluation both for their practice and for their monitoring, but also, you know, are we able to do evaluations that are useful for practitioners and not just because we're interested in data from the academic side? I think those are some very important questions as well. But just to sort of, oh, this is not, how weird, it's not moving on. Let's have a look. I'm going to have to use that one. That's it. So very basically, what is evaluation? I mean, really what we end up doing is we do one of three things, and sometimes all three, which is that we're looking for outcome. In other words, what is the effect of the work? The outputs. So what are the numbers going through the particular program? And process. Now, often we leave out process, but process is very important because what is it that's being done in the program that actually creates these other things? So for evaluation, we really need to think, well, what is it that we are measuring? What is it that we are trying to find out? Is it the effect? Is it the numbers coming through? And or is it how it's being carried out? Or is it sort of a combination of those things? And I know that with funders, or like in the UK, there's been a lot of pressure at different times, for example, from the government and so on, to come up with the outputs. You know, how many are coming through? It's a sort of sausage machine effect. You know, how many sausages are rolling off the end of the production line? Never mind about what's the effect on those sausages or the process by which you got there. You know, so we really need to think about that kind of thing. And who decides? Is it your funders who decide that you have to do certain things, you're measuring certain things? Is it your practitioners, or is it the academics? Who decides on what is being measured, but also therefore what is success? And we need to look at that. And Berta mentioned that. And one of the things that so often is forgotten about when people do evaluation is that, well, what were the aims of the program in the first place? What did the program set out to do? And is the program doing what it set out to do? Now, that should be a basic question in an evaluation, but often other issues come in and become more important in measurement, not what the program itself was trying to do. And I've been working on an interesting example of that recently in relation to the notion of justice, where people think justice is the number of convictions that you get. No, justice is actually when the victim feels that they have got what they needed in terms of empowerment or whatever. So you have to rethink what is the measurement of what is the aim? Why does the victim want to do something? And therefore, what is the outcome? So what is the program trying to do? And the other thing that we do in evaluation is to see whether actually the program does anything that's more positive than not doing it or than doing something else. So just to evaluate a program and think, oh yeah, it does all sorts of things. Well, that's no good if by not doing it, the same things would happen. Or if you did a different type of program, the same things would happen. You need to have some idea of comparison and not necessarily just doing the internal program. Let's see. So measure these outcome measures. So looking at the effect. Are we thinking through if they're sensitive to what the programs are trying to do? Success. Is success a reduction in violence or abuse? Or is it about being nicer to be with? Is that what we're trying to do? Are we actually trying to get rid of the violence? Or are we just trying to create better people? Are we trying to increase empathy or reduce psychopathology? What are we actually measuring? What are we trying to have as the aim of the program? And therefore, what is success? And which behaviors do we include? A lot of the earlier evaluations only looked at physical violence as an outcome, change potential. Well, we know perpetrators get up to all sorts of different behaviors. So how do we get at all those different behaviors? How do we measure change? And who actually decides what is success? I've seen some evaluations where it was the perpetrator decided. So, for example, the Danish government did some evaluations and they just asked perpetrators, was it a successful program? And of course, the perpetrator said, yeah, great, fine, brilliant, I'm a good guy now. So there are these sorts of issues. Do you get partner feedback? Or do you use criminal justice records? Again, some very limited evaluations that only used the idea of recidivism. Do the perpetrators end up being arrested again? Which is, again, a very limited measure, but maybe part of what we need to look at. Changing behavior, changing attitudes. How do we measure that? Do we use some of the general standard measures internationally? Do we also use more qualitative measures? Do we do interviews to tease these things out? And what about these ongoing records that programs themselves may be creating? So there are lots and lots of issues there about that we need to make decisions about. And we may need to include a lot of these different things when we're actually devising an evaluation. And is it also sensitive to different groups of perpetrators? One of the big problems with comparing evaluations is that they're often looking at quite different groups of perpetrators. So we really need to know a lot about what works for who. And that is a really big question that often isn't being asked. All we ask is, does it work? Not, does it work for particular individuals rather than others? So what are the motivations? So there was this really interesting evaluation some years ago in Austria where they looked at the completions. And they noticed that guys, there was sort of a difference between completers and non-completers, but it also seemed to be linked back to levels of motivation. And if you're in a program, you decide you're not going to let anybody on who isn't already motivated to change, then presumably you might get change. You have to think about that. You know, if you don't let guys on programs, if they've got problems like big mental health problems or drug problems or alcohol problems, but are very motivated and want to engage, well, you're more likely to get individuals who are complete, but may also get individuals who are more likely to actually change than whether or not they had a program. You know, these are important issues. Different perpetrators use different ranges of violence. They're what I call all-rounders, those who are violent in their relationships, but also violent more generally. They're those who only do a partner violence and so on. We know there are quite different groups of perpetrators as well. Are you focusing on them? Are you focusing on high harm? Are you focusing on moderate? What are you focusing on? That also influences what the outcomes might be from the evaluations. Are you including alcohol and drugs, mental health, etc.? Are you actually comparing completers and non-completers so that you know whether those who complete are the more normal, ordinary guys who would have changed anyway, compared with those who don't complete, who drop out, who are more problematic? You know, is that what's going on? You know, you need to look at that. Are there other external controls? So, for example, some of the early evaluations in the United States, where they got really good outcome data, you know, it looked like they were really effective programs, were actually done in army settings. So the guys had to do the programs. There was this real kind of control issue going on that they were doing the program within. And that in itself is also very interesting, you know, whether certain controls lead to different sort of outcomes. And the role of facilitation, so often that's left out, because what is the role of facilitator? You know, to what extent is the quality of facilitation actually influencing all these outcomes anyway? If you've got a really good, very experienced set of facilitators, does that make a difference to if you've got people who are not so experienced or are working to a different manual? By facilitators, I mean the individuals who are carrying out the so-called treatment. I've got to move on very quickly now, and also, what theory of change are you working to? You know, are you looking at the more macro level issues? Are you starting out with that idea of domestic violence as a pattern of coercive controlling behaviours within a context of gender inequality? That's the Istanbul Convention. You know, are you starting from the Istanbul Convention definition of how this works, or a more sort of micro level, or not? I mean, there's macro, there's a meso level. This is the meso level. Through perpetration is deemed to be more influenced by dynamics in the person's family or couple environment. Or you're looking at the micro. It's much more the individual level factors such as insecure attachment, alcohol, etc. Or it may be that you need to kind of include all of these different levels. But what theory of change are you operating to? And that links into the aim and measure as well, because are you then focusing on the safety of women and children? Or are you looking at change in behavior? Or are you looking at the change in patriarchal attitudes? I mean, this is getting enormous, isn't it? I mean, we could be here for days figuring out what is it that we're actually looking at. And I remember when we set up ReProvide, we spent months kind of looking at what could be our one measure, because it was so difficult to figure out, was it safety of women and children, or was it behavior change? And we just couldn't initially decide, and so on. So you need to really think through these things as well. So I go on and on and on, you know, what is being measured in relation to all this? You know, less no violence, better risk management, more women help to live, improved outcome for children, measuring the changes, again, is it less no violence, empathy, motivation, etc. Measuring quality of life. You know, are the men less anxious, less depressed? Have they secure attachment, etc.? Better relationship. And for example, the mirror belly evaluation decided that actually behaving better in the relationship, having nicer relationships, was actually a really good outcome. And again, measuring facilitation. You know, are you ensuring that you're also measuring what the impact is of the facilitation? And then we think about, well, how on earth does all of this stuff that I've talked about fit into a particular box labeled a random control trial or a different type of evaluation? You know, how do we figure this out? So now we are very much on the academic side. So the other things about all these other things about measuring that I've talked about so far, in some ways are also driven by your aims and what as practitioners you want to find out. But the type of evaluation, of course, then we get into the academic territory of who says what something's a gold standard and somebody poo-poos a different type of, you know, approach as being not quite as robust, etc. We need to think about what's possible and what is useful to do. Experimental design, so that what the random control trial, this is what, of course, was originally set up for people to test pills. You know, it's what they've also been working on with the vaccines. They've set up control trials where you've got some people end up taking the pill and others take what they think is the pill, but it's a placebo. And we can't do that with Perpetrator programs. You know, it doesn't work. But we can set up other types of control trials where we allocate the perpetrators either to the trial or not to the program or not to the program randomly, so that we are not picking, we're not cherry picking the individuals who end up in the program. And then we can compare if the same things end up as outcomes. So we did that recently, for example, with the DRIVE program, which was very, very complex program, setting in a community context with a lot of other agencies involved around the edges as well. But we were able to set up a random control trial, but what was called a pragmatic one. It was much more sort of socially informed and contextually informed. Then you get the more quasi-experimental, still using comparison, because it's quite important to compare. As I said much earlier, you know, that if you just look at your own program and you think, oh, great, this really works. Well, you don't know whether the same outcome would have happened if you hadn't done the program or if you'd used a different program. So actually to compare becomes very important. Gondolf's work in the States, where they did comparison of lots of different sites. It wasn't a random control trial, but it was using comparison, which was really important. So you may compare different types of perpetrators or different types of interventions or different settings and so on, but to make comparisons. And with the impact toolkit that we're using within WWP, we are able to use comparison because we are increasingly getting the same type of data, but from different sites, from different programs from different countries. We begin to build up this quasi-experimental approach. The non-experimental is much more the single group or more descriptive, or just a pre-post follow-up. And as I said, that you can do that, but you know, you have to be very careful about what you're claiming if you're doing that. I think I've got about 2 minutes, so I'm not going to talk more about that. But it really is the issue. Then is again, what does it do to your practice, whichever you're using. And then to get back to what Berta was saying, which is that evaluation, you know, what we do know from all these different work that's been done around the world is that it's often inconclusive, but really it's often because the measures being used. So all these things I was talking about, people use just very limited range of measures, and they often don't even link it back to the aims. And it means that we can't actually really compare across a lot of evaluations either. And there are lots and lots of different studies. I've just given some there. I'm not going to go through all of that kind of thing, but you'll see there, measures are limited, maybe just physical violence, no, in areas that have no obvious overall effect. But this one's important because it said for interventions targeted at a specific need and longer term had more positive outcomes. So we begin to see this thing at different groups of perpetrators may have different outcomes, etc. So we, Accuracy, they talk about how there's no definitive conclusion, but we don't know yet what works best for whom under what circumstances. So all these problematic kind of things. NICE, that was a big UK systematic review, and that found some limited effective programs, but there was very little long-term data, and that's the other problem. Is a lot of the evaluations stop at the point when the individuals finish the programs, but we need to see what happens afterwards. Do they sustain change as well? And so on. So what do we need? We need a model that allows accurate and robust sampling. We need, so we need to make sure we really understand who's in the sample. We need to understand who is participating. Why are they in the program? Why are they dropping out? If they do, when do they drop out? Why? Who actually completes? And then who is changing? When, why, and how? These are really, really important questions, but it takes into account all these different other questions that I've been talking about. But what we ended up with from some of the earlier impact work that we did was this evaluation process, or sort of a systematic way of looking at it, which is that if we all actually had data that at least had something to say about these different aspects, we would be able to compare across time and across programs. So that starting point, and who is coming into the program? In other words, what's our sample? Who's coming into the program at the beginning? How are we measuring at the beginning? What are we asking them about, or what are we looking at the beginning? And who says? Who is it that we are looking at? Are we asking perpetrators? Are we asking practitioners? Are we asking partners? Are we asking people outside? What's happening there? Who are we excluding, and why? Who are dropping out at that point? And then at the beginning of the first bit, it may be that T1, the beginning of the program, is individual work, and then you go on to group work. Some go into just all individual work. Again, you need to talk about that facilitation at the top. What is happening? How is it happening? What is the type of work being done at these different time periods? But during time one, again, what's the process? What's being done? Who measures, what measures, who says, and is anybody dropping out? At the end of T2 might be at the end of the actual intervention. Again, who's completing, what are you measuring, and who says, who is giving that information? And follow up, how long are you following up? And again, what measures are you using? Who's giving the information, etc. If we can have a consistency so that we can map everybody's data across on this kind of these sort of features, then we can actually make much better decisions about what's missing in terms of data and what's showing if anything works. So really, in the end, we should probably include quantitative, but probably qualitative things, looking at outcomes and output and process. We should have some sort of control group. We should have a range of possible outcome measures, which can be difficult if you're using a random control, for example. Longer period, including post-intervention, and we should use outcome triangulation. In other words, we should use data from more than one source of data from, for example, partners. We should say who's participating, who's completing, who's dropping out, what point, their reasons, etc. And we should be very clear about what type of information is being collected at different time points. We should look at the context, the community context. We should look at whether other agencies are around, involved, referring, etc. So that leads me to the final point, which is the impact toolkit, which no doubt others will mention as well, but where we've ended up with some of these elements in there. It is potentially quite a useful measure, but it's a very quantitative measure. We don't have a lot of qualitative data in there, but it's got outcome, it's got outputs, it's got some process. We can compare across programs. We've got a range of outcome measures which we can look at over a longer period. We can do post-intervention. We can triangulate using data from partners because we've got both perpetrators and partners. We can say who's participating, completing and dropping out because that we ask about that. We ask some reasons for doing so. We use different time points to see how behaviors and attitudes might change throughout the course of the program. And we also have some questions about the community context and also some questions about agencies, referral in and agency involvement. If only quite limited. So the toolkit does do some of these things, but we could do with much more in there on facilitation, for example, and we could also do with more qualitative data. But it does quite a lot of the good things that we need. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for such an interesting presentation and reflection on what do we measure, if it's the outcome, the output, or the process, the idea of what works for whom, and also this idea of the role of facilitators, which is usually overlooked. And I think that's also a very, very interesting point. We have one question from the audience. We are a bit late in time, so we're going to take this question now. And then if the audience has more, or the participants have more questions, we can also discuss them at the end. So Sarah is saying, whilst the numbers are low, is research underway to evaluate what is effective for female or non-heterosexual perpetrators? So, you know,
yeah,
about that.
The answer is yes, and there has been some limited number of evaluations on that. I'm also just trying to do some new evaluation on female perpetration. Because there are lots of other types of questions we need to ask about that as well. And there's one systematic review on it, but the data on it so far is quite limited, but the data at the moment does suggest that the women on programs, a very high proportion are also victimized, domestic abuse victims as well as perpetration, and there are different issues in terms of facilitation that need to be in place.
Okay, thank you very much, Marianne. So as I said,
there's very limited. Sorry, and evaluation on LGBT is there's virtually none out there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if it's okay for you, Marianne, we will be taking other questions and the discussion more at the end when we will have also the ideas of the other participants in the roundtable. Again, thank you very much for this interesting food for thought. So I will invite now the rest of the experts to explain the context of the NGO, so the context in which they work, before starting the actual open discussion. So please, Elena, if you want to start, feel free.
Yes, thank you, Berta. And thank you for having me here today. I feel kind of overwhelmed by all the people that are here today. So I'm Elena Gaiotto. I work as a project manager for Una Casa per l'Uomo. We are an Italian NGO that works both with perpetrators and with victims of violence. We have a treatment program for perpetrators that is quite long because it lasts 2 years, more or less. We have we start with 5 individual interviews, and then we move on to 2 different group sessions. The first one lasts 24 meetings, 1 each week. And then the second one is another year of work. So it's kind of long and it has a lot of different steps. So when we are talking about measuring the outcome and the results, we have to take into consideration that it's a long time and a lot of different steps and periods. So the peculiarity of our program is that we work with the perpetrator, but we have one dedicated professional that gets in touch with the victim, because it's fundamental in our program to get in touch with the victim and to see how things are going on the other side, not just with the perpetrator, but the victim too. It's fundamental to monitor and to assess the risk, to assess the situation, and also to give to the victim all the information about support programs for victims. And in fact, we also have a support service for victims that is separated from our perpetrators program. We have two different teams that work, one with the perpetrator and one with the victim. And the focus what we are really focusing on in these years is the collaboration between the treatment program for the perpetrator and the support service for the victim, because it's fundamental that the professional that work for the two different teams and the two different sides of the same couple that we are working with, it's important to exchange information. And it's fundamental to have a correct assessment of the risk of the situation and to tackle and to take on all the measures that are needed to protect the victim, because we have to remember that the ultimate goal and focus of our work is the protection of the victims, both women and their children. So we are really working on this, and we are working on a European project on this. It's called ASAP, that was really about creating a protocol for the collaboration with all the tools and instruments that we devised for this. And one of these tools is in fact the Impact Toolkit.
Thank you, Elena. So Thomas, if you want to continue, please.
Sure, thank you, Berta. Hello, everybody. Thomas Repka, and I am the leader of the therapeutic program of anger management in Czech NGO, League of Open Men. The shortcut is LOB, so I use this shortcut. We are initiative for quality of men's life. We focus on issues that men in the Czech Republic and abroad currently deal with. And one of our topic is strength and violence. And we tell that strength is okay, but violence is not. We teach experts as well from another organization to work with this method. And currently, our program, anger management, is funded from European Social Fund. And I can briefly describe our work with clients. At the beginning of the program, our clients can get 5 hours of individual therapy with their case manager. And then the whole team, choose always 10 men to start a therapeutic group. We have few rules to be able to start this group, and one of that is some overtaking the responsibility for the behavior. It's really important to be able to go through the whole group. This group therapy takes 45 hours, and then there are 6 months of some recovery phase when the client should work on themselves, but they are able to contact their therapists and get 2 hours of support. And after these 6 months, there is a group follow-up session where the way of the client in our programs finish. And during this time, it's maybe 10 months. Clients fill 4 times that IMT tool that we use, and we work with their partners as well. We meet them for 3 times and get another view of the situation from them. I think I can talk about the program maybe 1 or 2 hours. So this is really briefly, and if you have some questions, I can answer them later in the discussion.
Thank you, Tomas. So now, Marina, please. You want to continue?
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Marina, and I'm working for the organization called Men of the 21st Century, but we usually shorten it to M21 because we actually don't focus on men solely. We operate out of Russia. We're based, most of our team is based in St. Petersburg, but we work throughout the country with the perpetrators and also with the Russian-speaking perpetrators outside of the country as well. We started actually over 13 years ago, so that's quite a long time. And our program working with perpetrators grew with the help of a crisis center for women located in St. Petersburg. So we collaborate a lot with crisis centers in different cities and in different regions of the country, but we work primarily with perpetrators. And again, as I said in the beginning, we focused mostly on men because there was a big need for that, and this was our idea to focus on. However, now we've noticed that we also have female perpetrators who are contacting us, and we also work with perpetrators who use violence not only against their partners or spouses, but also against their children. We work in 2 ways. So we have individual counseling, and this is the core of our programming, is the one-on-one counseling with perpetrators. Again, as I said, it's usually men. However, we've recently started working in the group setting, and so far we're working in the group with the parents of, well, firstly, it's parents of whose children are adopted. So we want to provide them psychological, emotional support, and also talk to them about violence towards their adoptive children. We actually have a colleague here on a call. His name is Andre, and maybe he can talk more about this program. But yeah, as I said, the individual program for us is usually 24 to 26 weeks. So it's about half a year, 6 months. And what is important for this program is that the person, the perpetrator that participates in the program needs to go through certain stages of counseling, and it's a model that we use. It's a 5-step model. So the idea is that in a perfect scenario, in a general setting, the person would be going through those 5 stages of the program in about 5 to 6 months. However, we have had cases when people have completed this program sooner and faster, and we've also had cases when the counseling needed to take longer. And another thing I wanted to mention is that we are not supported by the government in Russia. There isn't. We try to collaborate with like women's centers that are also government funded and government based, but there is no proper system to support our work. Therefore, we usually only accept people who come to us. So there's no court-appointed perpetrators that we work with. So it's just the people who want to work with us, and they're usually either have already decided to change their behavior and to be part of the program, or a lot of times, maybe more than half of the times, it's their partners who have told them about the program, and the perpetrators embarked on this journey. I think overall, one last thing, well, 2 last things actually. We were discussing the topic of alcohol and drug abuse, and our position is that we don't take people who have those issues that are very pressing in their lives. So if someone is having a problem with alcohol or drugs, we usually explain to them and refer them to specialized services that help with that. And then potentially after that, when this situation is handled and it's under control, then they can come to our program. And the last thing I wanted to say is about online work. And we have been working, I mean, nowadays I can see that a lot of counselors have to be working online with perpetrators, but actually my colleagues have started working online for maybe about a couple of years ago. And from their experience, what I've gauged from them is that actually working online has been almost as effective, and maybe in some senses even more effective for the people who are not based in St. Petersburg and who could not attend those sessions in person. So it has been working and it has been effective. And obviously nowadays we just have to do that. And we've expanded our online work in the last year because of the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you also, Andre. So if you want to add something either now or in the open discussion, you know that you're always invited also. So we have some questions, but I think we can keep them for the open discussion, because if they are not answered somehow during the discussion, or if the topic goes into the direction of the questions that we have had, then I can also raise them during the open discussion. So now we have a clearer idea of the context in which you work, and we think that this is very important to have an idea of how the program is run, where is it based, because now this has implications on how do we evaluate, as Marianne was also mentioning at the beginning in her presentation. So now we will start the third and last part of our roundtable, which is the open discussion. And first, I would like to discuss about your experiences before starting the actual outcome evaluation. So I would like you to explain and to give inputs around the reasons that made you decide to evaluate your work in the precise moment in which you started to do so, the challenges that you found when trying to find a suitable procedure, a suitable method, suitable tool. So all these kind of aspects that you had to discuss and think about, that Marianne said that can take very long before starting the actual outcome evaluation. So please feel free to start talking about all these experiences just before starting, because maybe we have also other professionals in the audience that are starting to discuss about that. So I think that your experience during this process of discussion can also be helpful for the audience.
I'll go first, okay? I'll break the ice. So, the evaluation of a program has always been one of the, many questions. One of, the problems that we faced. We have, a quality system in our organization, and our auditor always told us that we need to evaluate what we do. So with the program for perpetrators, it was always hard. We didn't really know how to do it. So we started by, analyzing the data that we have to collect for the National Statistics Institute and for all the, public funders of our program. So we have to collect a lot of data. So we started by, analyzing the data about the dropouts, or about, anographic, aspects of the perpetrators. But it was really hard to have an overview of how things were going, because we are not experts on data analysis, on statistics. So we can just, take, a look at the dropout rate, and was the biggest thing that we could take a look on. Then we are part of a national association of the programs for perpetrators, which is called Relive in Italy. And we came across the impact toolkit, and we started using it, by ourselves. We just, use it 3 times in a 2-year period, but we just, collected the data without really sending it to you for evaluation. So it was kind of, pointless evaluation. And then with the start of the ASAP project, we started using it because it's part of our collaboration protocol with the Service for Victims. And now that we realize that for the evaluation, for a thorough evaluation of the program and assessment of how things are going, we need to have somebody that overviews our results and that gives us inputs and answers about how things are going, a higher outlook, and so on.
Thank you, Elena. So Thomas, maybe you want to share something that is also related to your collaboration with the research center, and how did you start thinking about this and the project?
Yeah. Thank you. There are 10 organizations, almost 10 organizations in the Czech Republic working with perpetrators, but there was no useful tool to evaluate the program in Czech context. I have experience from another organization where I worked before long, and we did only something small for our donor, but we all know that it wasn't so complex, so it was not useful for comparison with other programs, so on. So now in London, when we were preparing this program for these 3 years, we decided to use some tool from abroad, and we found this IMT tool. So for us, it was a challenge to translate this to the Czech context. We were first organization to do this in Czech Republic, and there are many words that in this topic are really hard to translate. So we were discussing for weeks with Berta as well, and then we started to use this. And now when we have been using this for 1 year, we see some great parts of this tool, and then we discuss another part that we still need to deal with, because our clients are not only clients who do violent behavior to their partners, but we have clients who are violent to their children, to their parents, and so on. And we see that it's really hard to develop some universal tool to use for another kind of clients. But in my opinion, it's really useful to do some complex tool that could compare the effectivity of program not only in Czech context, but it's really useful to compare that with another European countries, because on every annual conference we discuss the difference in maybe social system, political system, and it's really interesting to be able to improve our programs, and to have some data is some necessary part of that when we can write another grants, to do another fundraising, to be able to maintain the quality of our program. Because, as I said, there are maybe 10 organizations in the Czech Republic, but pool of money to work with these clients is really small in the Czech Republic. So we need to see abroad to get another chance to get money for this program, because thanks to the data we see that it's really useful. It's really useful, and we can stop violence in families in the Czech Republic. And why I really support each and other organization who are thinking about it. Just use something. It's not necessary has to be IMT, but use something that you can measure the effectivity and to see that you are useful for clients. Because, as you know, and as we all know, psychotherapy is really hard to measure. So to have some tool, it could be really useful for our inner motivation to continue working in it, because it's a really hard topic.
Thank you, Tomas. So, Marina, if you want to share some insights on the process before doing the actual outcome evaluation also. And
You asked me, yeah, just picking up some questions actually. Somebody was asking about what happens when you've got different approaches.
yes.
So different types of facilitation approaches, and of course that's really, it is very important to be very clear about what the approaches are, and there's been so little work. Again, Thomas was just saying about it's difficult to get at looking at the approach that the facilitators are using perhaps, but there's been some brilliant work by the Finnish group at Jyväskylä looking, but they've done observation, where they've actually, they are some of the only ones that have done a lot of work on facilitation, and their work is so important in showing exactly what facilitators are up to in terms of creating change in perpetrators and the way that operates, and it just shows how important it is for us to look at that. And it may be that actually it's not about whether you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a sociologist, wherever it is, it's actually that there are it looks like there are particular elements of facilitation that are particularly important, particular ways in which you move the perpetrator, their kind of thinking around. And so it may be that we need to start thinking not just about discipline in terms of treatment, but actually how does the facilitation operate? What are the positive aspects? And I think the Jyväskylä work starts to do that. I mean, the other thing that Thomas was bringing up was about the not intimate partner violence, and we've focused a lot on intimate partner violence in terms of the measurement. And I think you're absolutely right, Thomas. We do need to think how to bring in those other aspects and what to use because the impact toolkit uses. It compares, as Ilana was talking about as well, it compares what the perpetrator and the partner says. It's very important to look at the victim side to as part of the measurement. But what do we do if it's children and so on? So we need to sort of have a think about that.
Thank you, Marianne. So there is also another interesting question in the audience. So maybe, Marina, you can also try to focus on that. Asmita is asking, what is the most evident and repetitive challenge encountered during the data collection, and what kind of steps can one take to deal with it? So what are the challenges? Let's move now to the challenges that you have encountered, and and how did you try to overcome them?
Perfect. Yes. Well, I mean, it's hard for me to speak about the challenges of all the groups, but what we have encountered was, first, yes, that was similar to what Thomas was saying, and Marianne just seconded that. We also have various groups of perpetrators, and we don't quite know how to use the impact toolkit to apply to those who use violence against children or their elderly parents. And we have tried that. We have tried to sort of amend the toolkit and maybe take mostly the information about the behavior and focus maybe a bit more on physical violence. But then again, let's say in a relationship between a child and a parent, the things that we expect and the level of freedom and the power balance is just completely different. Another thing that we have faced was to actually implement the toolkit so that our counselors use that, because on the one hand, we have 6 counselors and staff, and everyone has been very interested and excited about using the impact toolkit. But then on the other hand, there's always been this question, well, how to use it appropriately? How is it okay, let's say, for us to give the entire questionnaire on the first meeting, or should the counselor maybe discuss these questions during therapy and then fill out the questionnaire? So we've had quite a few questions on that, and I think a lot of them come from the way we practice counseling for perpetrators in general, because our counselors have different approaches to psychological counseling. And while we still work in the frame of the same model, they use slightly different tools and different methods, and sometimes we don't feel like it's very appropriate to just even if it's an in-person meeting, to just send an entire questionnaire to one of the perpetrators, and then once they see it, and some questions are really harsh and tough, and their questions, have you abused someone physically, and there are details about that. And I feel like there's always this fear that some of the perpetrators wouldn't want to disclose that, because I mean, it's just not a very comfortable thing even to admit to yourself. And then secondly, there's always this question of what's going to happen from the legal standpoint, because since we're not associated with the police or with anyone, we don't really disclose this information, but there's still a lot of distrust in the population in general.
Elena,
I'm going to say one of the challenges that we face now with this COVID pandemic is that all our activities are done online. So when we used to do, for example, the impact interviews, we gave at the end of our sessions, we used to give the questionnaire to the perpetrator and have him fill out the questionnaire. The same went with the, when we met, because, the impact questionnaire is done in parallel, both by the perpetrator and by the victim. So when we had to do it with the victim, it was usually done at the end of the interview with her. We just let her 15 minutes to just take a look at the question and answer. Now that the interviews are done just online, it's hard because asking all of those questions, I spoke with a colleague that specifically works with the victim. Asking all of those questions online felt like police interrogations on some points. So we had to try and find a new way of doing it. So for example, we found out that the victims, the partners, are willing to do it on their own. So we just send to them the questionnaires, and they fill it out and then send it back to us. So we have, to adapt and to find, suitable ways of doing things, even, with the challenges that we are faced today.
Thank you, Elena. So Tomas, I don't know if you want to share also some inputs about the challenges that you found when trying to do this evaluation, the outcome evaluation.
I agree with Elena that online context now is really a challenge for us as well. Before that, we used to fill the questionnaire in paper form, and then to get the data into Lime Survey. But now we have to switch and directly fill the data into Lime Survey. And so for us, it was a challenge to think about it, how to do it in a simple way. So we just use ID and send ID to our clients. And our clients have, we are trying to get them enough space on online consultation to fill the questionnaire. And sometimes it could be really useful to share the screen when they fill this questionnaire. But for some of partners of our clients, it's really hard to, in this strange time, it's really hard for them to find some place, some great time for consultation. So mostly with them, we have another process that we send it to them. We send them some link, and they can it online at night when they have enough time for themselves. But it's not as easy as it seems, because our experience is that filling this questionnaire for partners could be really hard. They can admit that there is some violent behavior from their partner that they really suffer from, and they need some immediately support from us in that time. So maybe we use this way to just send them a link in a way feeling maybe T3 version, but not T0, because we don't want to let them alone with this questionnaire at the beginning of cooperation, because we see it could be really hard for them to see the ways that they can have an experience with. Is it understandable?
Yes, so the idea of starting the outcome evaluation, not right just at the beginning, at the first meeting, but when you have established a relationship also, and everyone feels comfortable, especially with the partners and ex-partners.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that was quite understandable. So I would like also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions from the audience. Okay, we can take some of these at the end of the roundtable, because I would like also now to focus a bit the reflection on the lessons learned. So maybe you can also have some ideas of what have you learned from this process that can also be helpful from the audience. If there's some result or some experience that maybe has been helpful or informative also for your clinical practice. So this idea that Marianne was saying, that we don't just do outcome evaluation because of research purposes, but we do it also to improve our actual clinical practice, no? And that setting up an evaluation procedure can also help on having a clear focus of what we do in the Perpetrator program. So if you would like to share some inputs around those lines and those ideas.
I could start, if that's okay. I think, yes, what we have learned over the time, as I said, we started working and started to try to implement the toolkit, I think in 2019, but we have only properly used it in 2020. And we didn't actually, again, since we have been working online for quite a few years before the COVID situation, we haven't actually experienced maybe the same level of issues as my colleagues have talked about, because we feel like, again, sometimes it's actually a lot easier for people to participate in the program when they're online, because, well, either they're not in the same city again with us, or because they might not feel too comfortable coming to the office and feeling judged. So doing the online evaluation has been quite good. Again, it could be scary, and people might also have these feelings that, well, they have to face this, they have to be all alone with the information about violence, and it works both for perpetrators and for their partners. And maybe it's not that easy to do it online, but we haven't really experienced that big of a problem when it comes to just sending those questionnaires and giving them IDs, giving IDs to the perpetrators and asking them to fill it out. I think another thing that we have learned is that we started the process to improve our practice first, and because our organization started with this need that there was this understanding among experts and professionals that this work needs to be done. We will be able to support gender equality and stop the violence against women and girls. So in the beginning, again, 13 years ago, there was just this idea that this work needs to be done, and implementing the toolkit has helped us, again, pose and maybe answer some of those questions that we need to answer these days, like, why are we doing this? What is our goal? Is it, we want to reduce the amount of violence, but then are we only talking about physical violence? Are we mostly focused on that or not? So this toolkit has been very helpful to us to shape our work, to ask ourselves the questions that we need to be asking, and also to start collecting data, because that will be useful, again, for us to see what's going on, and also for donors and for funders.
Thank you.
So yeah, one thing that has turned out to be useful for us is that, like Marianne said earlier, what are we measuring when we talk about evaluation? So as a program, we are mainly focused on the day-by-day measurements. So the safety of the victim is our first goal. So that is our primary goal. So when we decided to implement the toolkit, we needed to have a tool that could give us the results on the program as a whole, because that is the hard thing to measure. We can see how things go day by day, case by case, but it's hard to have the whole picture of what is going on, especially when you have a program that lasts 2 years plus the follow-up, because I didn't mention that we have 2 years plus all the follow-up interviews, and it's a really long time, and it's difficult to measure the change. So one thing that the impact toolkit helps us monitor, for example, the decrease in the repetition of violent behaviors through time, and multiplied by all the clients that we have. So it gives us, a perspective on which steps are more effective, and how the program is developing, is helping the perpetrators understand and reduce their violent behaviors. So it's an overview, an overlook on the things that we do that it would be otherwise hard to see it, to evaluate.
Thank you. So it gave you the general perspective of what is working or not in the program.
Yes. Well, if I must be honest, it also helps us assessing, for example, the risk, because when you do, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the toolkit, but it has a lot of questions about violent behaviors. There's emotional violence, on physical violence, sexual violence. And the same questions are asked to the victim and to the perpetrator, so we can monitor through time, how many violent behaviors there are, and we can adjust the risk assessment according to the answer that we have. So it's a tool that works both for the day-by-day activities that, for the general assessment of the program.
Thank you, Elena. So, Tomas, I don't know if you would like to share something about the challenges. Then we can take some questions from the audience. And if someone is interested, maybe you can also show a bit some of the results that you have obtained.
Yeah, I can say one thing. I think we are still at the beginning of some research in our program, because we still haven't finished first cycle, because now there is a recovery phase of our first group, and complete data we will have in April this year. So we learn from that every day, and I think, and I hope we can improve maybe the tool, maybe our work in the future. So we've got really few data. I can share it if you want to see it. I have 3 graphs prepared for you to see some numbers from first 10 clients. Are you interested in it?
I would say yes.
Yes.
I think we have some time to show it. And meanwhile, Marina, there was a question for M21 saying if it's the only perpetrator program in Russia.
Yes, so M21 works with people in Russia, and sometimes expatriates who live outside of Russia, but then they're Russian speaking.
But is it the only program for perpetrators in Russia?
I know there have been some new programs as well. Yeah, maybe Andrei wanted to reply to that as well.
Yeah, Andrei, please go ahead.
Yeah.
So I could say proudly that right now we have many programs in Russia, but most of them situated in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. But we have several of them in northwest of Russia, in Arkhangelsk and Chernipovets. some of them have some special specialization. For example, one organization work only with young perpetrators, another one work only with perpetrators in prison, something like this. And we have organized association for counselors who work with perpetrators, and there will be like umbrella organization, and where we could organize some support system for each other, supervision, intervision, education programs, and etc. And there was happened in the last year, yes, maybe 1 year ago. I mean, we organized this association. That's it.
Thank you. And there is another interesting question just before showing the data from Tomas. It was directed to Marina, but I think that any of the participants could answer that. They were asking if you can compare the answers from victim and perpetrators, if you do that, and how do you include that in your work? So any of you, if you want to.
I'll go. So we have, like we mentioned briefly before, we have a protocol for collaboration between, the perpetrators program and support service for victims. So we are starting to compare the results of the interviews. And it's important because, not the perpetrators are not always honest when they answer, and we can have, having the same answers, the answers from the same question given by the victim. And I say victim and a partner because sometimes, for example, it's the elderly parents, the mom usually. So it's helpful to compare the answers, and it's also helpful for both professionals that work on both sides to adapt, to take the proper measures to protect the victim and to tackle, different aspects during the interviews with the perpetrators. So it also helps programming how things are done and how things can be done during the programs.
Thank you. Is Marina and Tomas, I don't know, or Andre, I don't know if you want to answer something from this question, or maybe Tomas, you can, I don't know if in the results you have also the partners or victims answers.
I agree with Jelena that it's really important to collect this data as well, but for us it's really hard to get the data because our experience is that almost half of partners don't want to cooperate with us, or we are able to get them to the first consultation, but not to the second or third. There are really high number of dropping out of partners from our program. So we are discussing this every month on our meetings. What could we do differently? Maybe we will change the method of collecting data. Maybe it could be more useful to better cooperate with another organization working with victims and collect data from them, maybe rather than pick alone only with partners, because we recommend these services to the partners or on the first meeting. So the data that I have, I can send them maybe when we finish. It could be maybe more useful, but they are only from clients, because as I said, we are at the beginning and still don't have enough data from partners right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Marina, how has it been, or Andre, how has it been the experience gathering the data from the partners from your side? We know that this is challenging, but also very important. So.
Yes, so it's been quite similar in our case for what Tomas was just saying, that, well, it's not that the problem is that victims don't always want to cooperate, at least for us, but it's just that we are used to, so we've had this practice of communicating with a partner, but it was done, it's usually done by one of the counselors that is obviously not counseling the perpetrator, and it would usually be a phone interview or a phone conversation that would last, I don't know, anyway, from 10 to maybe 30, 40 minutes, depending on how much the victim would want to talk about this. And we would do several of those check-ins, one usually in the beginning of the program, and maybe one closer towards the end of the program or after the perpetrator has completed their program. But we haven't really had a chance to use the toolkit fully. So we've integrated some of the questions from the impact toolkit into this interview, into this call, but we haven't had a chance to properly send those forms out yet. But we're hoping we get to do this, but we need to think of how to do it in a manner that is comfortable for the partners as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marina. So I think we've answered most of the questions. There were also some questions about the having co-facilitators and the use of ex-perpetrator, no, having the ex-perpetrators as co-facilitators, but I think this question was also answered in the chat from some previous experiences. So I don't know if someone has another question. We are a bit, yeah.
Berta, there's a question about privacy and
yes, okay.
So it's one of the most important things, but when we talk about collaboration and these kind of things, we have in our privacy statement, we have a specific line for the impact, and we specify that we, if the perpetrator agrees, we collect information and we share them for research purpose. And this is part of the, we make it clear since the beginning. Also, when we ask the perpetrator for the phone number of the victim, and it's also in the privacy statement that we have. So everything that we do is explicit and specified in all of our privacy statements.
Thank you, Elena. I just overlooked that question. So I don't know if you have any other insights, any of the experts of the roundtable, or if not, we will be closing. Also, if any of the participants, if you have further questions or inquiries, you can just email me or Anna, and we will get you in touch with the experts also to support you with any questions or further ideas that you might have. So if there's nothing else, I would say thank you to the experts today for bringing your expertise